Welcome to our third lecture over the early Roman Empire. So in the last lecture, we discussed the founding of Rome and then disposal of the tyrannical kings when the Senate was created in 509, thus ushering in the Roman Republic. Now you're probably familiar with Julius Caesar. So in 44 BCE, Julius Caesar was killed by the Senate. However, or most of the senators, let's discuss some of the background of that. Basically, there had been multiple battles, etc. There's some chaos. And so one of the safeguards within the Roman Senate was during a time of especially war, instead of having two consuls who were in charge, you could assign one dictator. And this would be for a short period of time, only during this chaotic war period. And then once that ends, the dictator would step down and then the two consuls would rule again to create this sense of balance. So Julius Caesar becomes dictator during this time of war, and he doesn't give it up. He gives lavishly upon the plebeians. So the plebeians are the lower class. You have a lower class and an upper class. The middle class doesn't exist until the Dutch capitalism of the Dutch merchant class. So we have the lower class and the upper class, and Caesar has been treating the much larger lower class of plebeians much better. And so they support him. They're okay with this, with him continuing his dictatorship. The Senate is not. This is not how the Senate works. He's supposed to give it up. So essentially he is murdered by these senators, and Rome erupts in a civil war. And I'm very much generalizing here. You have multiple powers. Basically, you have three main figures who are arguing for power. And in 31 BCE, we have the Battle of Actium. And this is the end of Hellenism. This is the end of our Roman Republic. And so you have Cleopatra and Mark Antony who are killed. Pompey had already been killed, the other power. And out comes our first emperor, Octavian. Octavian is the nephew of Julius Caesar. So he was fighting on behalf of those who supported Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar had actually even officially adopted Octavian. So he's considered the son of Julius Caesar. He is granted the title of Augustus by the Senate at this time, which is supreme ruler, and he becomes the first emperor of Rome, thus ushering in our Roman Empire. To help calm and to quell and as well as to comfort the Roman people, he instates what's called the Pax Romana, a period of peace. Now again, we've had a major civil war, not just against two powers, but against three powers and brother against brother, etc. So there's been so much bloodshed. It's a very sad time of mourning, essentially. So there's also farmers hadn't been producing crops. Not only were many of them killed, but also why produce crops when there's so much bloodshed and death? People weren't having babies. Think of how that's often an argument during times of turmoil of not to have babies. And so to help stimulate this growth in Rome, in every sense of the word, he instates the Pax Romana. And so from 27 to 180 AD, we have what's the golden age of Rome. Multiple emperors are ruling, and it begins with Augustus. And so you have the height of the Roman Empire by 117 with the largest land expansion. But let's talk about this, or we'll talk about this Pax Romana. So our early empire, this is on your handout, high empire, late empire. So here we are. And here we have Augustus of Prima Porta. So this is an extremely large sculpture. It's 6 foot 8 inches, and it's an imperial portrait. Let's think back to our Roman patrician portraits of the Republican period. They emphasized their experience through age. They even exaggerated these features of age, such as wrinkles, etc. But here we have Augustus, who is showing himself as idealized. He's still individualized. He doesn't look like some generic Greek god. This is what he looks like, but he's idealized. He's shown in his youth. He has an idealized body, And he's shown in his youth just like this in every portrait of him throughout his entire reign. And all of this is, of course, to communicate a ruler's power. So think back even to our palliative armor. The stance is very similar. Different intentions, but this works as a sense of power, of conquering. And so he is going to be looking back to the golden age of Greece to reinforce this idea that he is implementing and starting the golden age of Rome. So he's using known art that references a golden age to help communicate to the people that he is ushering in a golden age under this Pax Romana, this period of peace. However, we should note, it's not necessarily peaceful. There are some instances of where he's handling dispute through diplomacy, but you still have Roman troops elsewhere, and there is still battles and bloodshed, etc. But for the most part, within Rome itself at least, you have the Pax Romana and you have peace. So let's talk about Octavian's position and how he differs from our spearbearer Doryphoros. Actually, let's remind ourselves of the similarities first. So he's in the almost exact same contrapposto stance of our Doryphoros. I mean, almost to the T. Look at the position of his legs. He's idealized. Of course, though, his face is individualized. His hair is as well. We'll discuss that. Differences. So his arm is reaching up. His right arm. And this would have been a recognizable position showing that he's in order, that he's speaking to people. So rhetoric, this aspect of communication, especially in oral form, was one of the ideal values of the Romans. The senators had to communicate within the Senate. The leaders had to communicate to the Senate as well as to the people, etc. So this is a highly valuable skill. And so he's shown demonstrating his rhetoric, his powers of being an orator. He's commanding the attention of those in front of him. Arguably his troops, because he's in his military regalia. We still have this drapery of a toga, though, so think back to ancient Greece and togas. But he's in his Roman military regalia, which demonstrates his military power. We'll talk about how this represents a victory that he had just conquered a formidable foe. And of course, he's not nude, as already discussed. And there's also this little figure on the far left. So, again, remember, he is the blood lineage of Julius Caesar. He was his nephew, though Julius Caesar officially adopted him, so he's also technically his son. And Julius Caesar had been deified, which means he was considered a deity. This had not been done before by emperors, but it is done for most after, at least those who were well liked by the later people. Now, Julius Caesar claims lineage. He's been deified, so he has godly blood in his veins, and he claimed lineage to Aphrodite, or aka Venus for the Romans. And so this Cupid figure right here is associated with Venus and Aphrodite, and he's on top of a dolphin. Now, Aphrodite and Venus were born from the sea. So this inclusion of this little Cupid figure and this dolphin references Octavian's, or Augustus as he's now known, his deified lineage. So it's attesting to his power. It gives him authority. Consider how many times we've seen a ruler who is attesting to the gods supporting him. So here's what I was talking about, where he's shown in his youth throughout the entirety of his reign. His face is individualized. It becomes recognizable. But also notice his hair is recognizable. Above his eyebrows, he has this almost comma. It's often described as like a comma type motif. And so this helps for you to recognize Augustus. Here he is. We can see the details of his hair. Here he has this victory wreath. And here he is in this religious outfit. So anytime we see this drapery over the head, he's in this religious outfit. And in this case, we're seeing where he's representing the religion of the state. So there's still not much of a difference between politics and religion, and there is a state religion. This goes back and forth, but right now what we're seeing with Octavian as a power move is he's also in charge of the state religion. And like art of the ancient world, this would have been brightly colored and individualized. So the parts on his breastplate on this military regalia would have stood out much more. So let's look at his breastplate, and we have many figures across it. Basically, he's receiving the blessings of numerous gods, but we're going to focus on the central image with the personification of Rome on the left and the Parthian ruler who he defeats on the right. So the Parthians were a people in which the Romans had been battling for a period of time. They'd actually suffered numerous losses to the Parthians, so much so that the Parthians had stolen the standard of Rome. And this is an aspect of a military warfare. We've talked about like a standard before. Think back to the standard. And it's almost like a bigger version of capture the flag, where you would capture the enemy's flag when you conquer them. And so here the Parthians had the Roman standard for a period of time. Julius defeats them, and that standard is returned to Rome. On the left here we have this personification of Rome. Different art historians argue about who this is specifically, but just know it represents Rome. And so this Parthian ruler, he's got this crazy beard, this wild hair. He is a barbarian, but he's formidable. I mean, consider his contrapposto stance, and now he's holding the standard up, and he's giving it back to Rome because of Augustus. The standard is returned to Rome, and they have defeated the Parthians. Here we have a close-up. Now let's move on to our Pacus Augustae. And so this means the altar of Augustan peace. So again, he's re-emphasizing this period of the Pax Romana. He's telling the people that this will be peaceful under his reign, that Rome will be at peace. And we're going to see this in this altar. Here we are. Though we should note, what we're going to look at is the exterior, and the inside is the altar. So this is a sacrificial altar for the state religion in order to ensure peace. So almost all religions have an element of sacrifice in the origin story or throughout, still practiced today, in which sacrifices must be made to appease the gods to gain favor. Common motif throughout human history. And so here, sacrifices are made in order to gain favor to continue this peace. And so Augustus has built this structure to emphasize this. It was on the outskirts of Rome. Again, we're seeing that image of him in his religious form. And this was actually near where the military would train. So it's this reminder of to keep the peace. We have these extremely detailed reliefs. I mean, consider the sense of space in this relief on the exterior. In our foreground closest to us, we have this domesticated animal being brought likely for a sacrifice. We have the middle ground, these two figures, these two boys. Behind them, up on this hill, is this house. So there's this clear overlapping of space, of figures, a foreground, a middle ground, a background. The house looks smaller to emphasize distance, that it's farther back and up on this hill. So it's really just an extraordinarily detailed relief. And I want to hone in on this frieze, this processional frieze. So when we consider ancient Greece during its golden age, think back to, of course, our Parthenon and how it had a frieze and had a processional displayed. And so Augustus is pulling from that golden age of Greece. And here we have this processional. But what's new here that we haven't seen before? A child. These are individualized patricians. Here's some more children of these patricians. So again, the plebeians are a lower class. They're the majority of the population. The patricians are the ruling, wealthy elite. Now, during this time period of war, we have farmers, plebeians, etc., and patricians who aren't having kids. They think it's a difficult time period. And again, the plebeians there aren't crops being made, etc., etc. So part of this period of peace, part of this Pax Romana, and communicating to the Roman people that all will be well and that they're going to rebuild Rome and they're going to have a golden age, is you need food to be produced and you need to repopulate Rome. Augustus was particularly concerned with the lack of children that the patricians were having. He almost saw it as a threat to the patrician elite. And so here in this processional frieze, he's celebrating these children and he's celebrating the parents who had these children. So in other words, they've gained favor with Augustus for having kids. So this in turn, and they're individualized, so this in turn encourages other patricians to have kids to gain favor. And this was recognized, like marriages and having children were rewarded by the state in various ways. And in this case, where these individuals are seen on this major architectural structure. And so we're encouraging children here, essentially, to help with this golden age of Rome. We don't really see children in any art in the ancient world. Again, these people are individualized, they're specific people. So here's another frieze, which is going to reinforce this idea of fertility, not only in terms of repopulating Rome, especially with the patricians, but also with fertility of vegetation, of farming, etc., domestication of animals. We see that here. So we have several figures here. We don't have records of exactly who they are. Art historians argue that this central figure is either Tellus, so think back to Gaia, our earth goddess, or maybe it's Italia, Italy personified, or does it represent Peaks, who is peace, or Venus? Either way, our eyes are drawn to this central figure. She's centrally placed. All the other figures are gazing at her. This sense of line, as we perhaps start in the middle, we lead up to this swan, to this figure. The curved drapery around her leads back to our central female. The sense of line down her leg leads us to this other female. The curved linear lines lead us back to her. So again and again, our eyes are drawn across the composition, but we always come back to our central figure, who, in her lap, she not only has these two children, but she also has this fruit. Behind her, other forms of fauna and our domesticated animals. So there's this re-emphasis on fertility in every sense of the term in order to rebuild Rome and to help the Roman people. They need food to survive and animals for meat. And of course to repopulate, especially with the patricians. So here we have our altar to help enforce this Pax Romana, this peace, and to demonstrate that Augustus is ushering in the golden age of Rome. And if we're going to talk about our early empire, let's talk about our Colosseum. So, we've discussed Augustus, and this is part of our Julio-Claudian dynasty. After him comes Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. You may have heard of Nero. I'll come right back to him. After the death of Nero, you have this civil war. It's called the Year of the Four Emperors. They're each vying for power because this one dynasty has died. Others want to take over. And eventually Vespasian takes over, creating the Flavian dynasty. He restores order, and he's responsible for at least the initial construction of our Colosseum, which is then carried out mostly by Titus and wrapped up by Domitian. So we looked at Augustus, we're going to look at Nero, Vespasian, and more Titus. Our Colosseum. Now, it's actually called the Flavian Amphitheater. Okay, an amphitheater, amphi means two, and it's two theaters. So what do I mean by that? Think back to our Hellenistic Greece and how we talked about how the Greeks love theater. They love these dramatic theatrical productions. I mean, of course, as well as comedy. And so here is an example of a Greek theater from an aerial view. We've looked at a lot of marble, but what we haven't seen yet is concrete. So, the Greeks had to build their theaters into like a rock face. So they had to rely upon like this natural element. They had to build it upon it because they didn't have any means of holding up these heavy structures. So instead they built it into the rock face. The Romans create concrete, and it's a concrete in which we still have not been able to emulate. It's so strong. It so changes the world of architecture. It's what helps build the empire. It enables them to do so. And so then they're able to create what's called an amphitheater. And it's essentially, the theater is a semicircle, and so you've got these two put together to create a full circle. So these two theaters, all done because of concrete. And the Roman arch. So, Roman concrete, as I said, it's just an incredible material. It's extremely strong. The Romans, it creates the ancient world. But they also have the creation of the arch. It wasn't invented by them, but they're the ones who utilize it, and it becomes symbolic of the Roman Empire. So we've studied large structures, but they were built on this post and lintel system. Now we have the creation of an arch, which is done by these voussoir blocks and then held up by this keystone. So it helps to bear this weight, and this keystone in the center is what creates it all. You have this wooden frame structure, you put the voussoirs up on either side, and then it comes together with this keystone, and so this physics of this pushing of the weight and bearing the weight, etc., allows these basically heavy materials to come upon them. And so they can span these huge spaces. They don't need the support of a post and lintel system. So the Romans really understood the possibilities of the arch, and they run with it, and it becomes the symbolic of the Roman Empire. It creates stability. You don't need mortar. And this improving upon architectural techniques, just as the Romans took these Greek and Etruscan elements and created their own. So they're creating their own with this use of concrete and the arches. They created the concrete, but not the arch. And so this enabled them to forge these great roads, these aqueducts to bring fresh water across the empire, etc. And of course, the large structures such as the Colosseum. So the arch and concrete changed the world, creates the empire. Our Colosseum consists of arches and concrete. It had a travertine, this white facade. Yeah, I'm going to come back to these seats right here. But here we have Roman concrete and the arch changes the world. So, we said this is the Flavian Amphitheater, but why is it known as the Colosseum? Here's what it looked like originally, and I want to draw your attention to this colossal statue right here. So, end of the Claudio-Julian line, we have Emperor Nero. You may have heard of him. He's known to be notoriously psycho. Some of that is legend and stories, but it's called the Colosseum because it was built next to this colossal statue of Nero. We see that on the coins as well. Here's a comparison to like the Statue of Liberty. So it's colossal. It's extremely large. It's him in his nude form, representing is associated with the sun god and Jupiter, etc. And so, let's talk about Nero. There was this originally, before this was created, before the colossal statue, before the Colosseum later, before this area as we know it today is established, you have the center of Rome. And this area is mostly consisted of apartments of the plebeians. Okay, so of our lower class. And so it's very heavily populated. And a fire erupts in 64 AD, and it wipes through this area, like acres, kills people, it destroys these apartments, so these people are left with nothing. Now Nero, instead of rebuilding, he claims this land, this incredible real estate in our city center, and he says it's his own land now. Of course, the people are not happy with this. This is going to come back to haunt him. But upon this land, he creates this whole golden palace. And I mean, this is multiple acres that have been burned down. Hundreds of people's livelihood and homes are gone. And instead of rebuilding, he takes this as his own. And he builds this golden palace, he builds these gardens, he builds this artificial lake here. And so it becomes this expansive area just dedicated to him. Here are some of what remains of his palace. It would have had a lot of gold, hence Nero's golden palace. Look at all the interior paintings and decorations. I want to draw your attention to this octagonal room with this opening atop called the oculus. We're going to come back to that with our Pantheon later. But the people are not happy with this. Some even claim there's this rumor that Nero started the fire in order to gain this land, and that as the fire was raging through and destroying people and their homes, that he was just playing his harp. And this is likely that of legends. It was a very crowded place that was susceptible to fires anyway, but terrible that he took over this land, this public land. So, what did the Romans do after his death, in which he has to commit suicide? The Flavian dynasty builds our Colosseum. So underneath the Colosseum is Nero's golden palace. So think of the power move of this, where the next dynasty erases the image of the previous dynasty, at least the palace. They have that statue still there, but they build atop it. And this is solely for the people. It's free. Everyone can attend, of all classes. They sit in different areas, still like today, but it's free and it's for the public. What a power move. Before I go into all those details, let me remark a little bit more about the use of concrete in the arch. And so these arches, they could span huge spaces, they can carry and bear weight. And so what we see here is our barrel vault and our groin vault, which are both utilized throughout the Colosseum. So here we have on the left our barrel vault, and the arcade is this extending vault, this hallway essentially. And then over on the right is our groin vault and arcade, so where these arches are intersecting. You can see the differences here. We'll come back to this later with our Gothic and Romanesque. So groin vault, our intersecting, barrel vault, continuing in this arcade. Now what we're looking at here is the concrete, is what remains. Okay, look at all these holes. This entire Colosseum, interior and exterior, would have been covered with this travertine, material, this beautiful material. Like story of time is this travertine was removed during the Middle Ages and repurposed for churches. Essentially, if you go and visit St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican City, you'll have an idea of what these early Roman temples and structures would have looked like, because all that material was pulled from these early Roman temples and structures. And so again, what's left is the bones. This concrete core, we have some brick casings, but again, the travertine would have covered the exterior. It would have been placed upon everything. Now, it also would have had a retractable roof. Rome is extremely warm. It's really actually similar to Houston. So it gets pretty hot. And so you need this retractable roof in order to provide shade for the people who are attending these games, etc., that are occurring at the arena, within the arena of the Colosseum. So here's an idea. Our mason carré, which we've referred to, it is made of concrete and it has this marble and travertine exterior. So we get a general idea of what our Colosseum would have looked like. So I talked about with that 3 levels of seating. If we notice in these images, we have these 3 levels. Over here on the left, we have a little bit of the remnants of the nicer marble-covered seats. And so this was free to all Romans. But just like today, where like the more expensive seats are closer to the stage or the floor, and the higher up you go, the cheaper it is, you're still designated to certain areas depending on your class and social status. So the Colosseum is called, we've discovered why it's called the Colosseum. And so the Flavians built it. Again, they're building it atop of Nero's palace. So this is such a power move. It communicates their intentions. They're going to usher in peace after this wild period of Nero, followed by a brief civil war. And so the arena itself, so arena means blood. Excuse me, it means sand. Arena means sand in Latin. And this sand is used to soak up blood. So consider how this amphitheater has a different function than our Greek theaters with theatrical productions. Like I said, the origin story of Rome starts with blood. And so here we have these gladiatorial games, these hunting games of wild animals, beasts, and I think lions and tigers, etc., in which the main form of entertainment are these bloody battles. In the sand, the arena soaks it up. So when it was actually, the emperors wanted to show the people that they work for them, that they're going to take care of them. And what better way than to entertain them and to distract them from what came before. And so this is political propaganda. It's political propaganda for the Flavian dynasty. It started, but mostly completed during the reign of Titus, Vespasian's older son. And so once it opens up, there's this 100-day gladiator, like, spectacular event. And it's 100 days. It's free to all. Sorry, I misspoke. Most of it was done during the reign of Titus, but it was completed by Domitian, the last of this line. And so it was nothing like that had ever been seen before. It's 4 stories tall. It's this massive arena. But the capacity holds about 50,000 spectators. And so they open it up, and it's 100 days. It's free food, free attendance, different forms of entertainment throughout the day in order to communicate to the Roman people that they're there for them to usher in this change. I should also mention in this interior, part of this 100 days, believed to be at the end, is they actually flooded the arena with water, and they did this big naval battle. Part of it was built, or at least by this artificial lake that Nero had created, so they already had some of the piping and water sources, but they are capable of doing that. Underneath the arena, you can see all these passageways, and so that allows for like trap doors, etc. There's a movie called Gladiator. It's pretty bloody and risque, but it gives a pretty good depiction at least of the different passageways underneath the arena and the trap doors, etc. Now on the exterior, again, it would have had this travertine. You can see the holes of how they were pulled out. And we have these engaged columns, which I've already mentioned before. And so they're using the Greek 3 orders. We have our Doric on the bottom. Our second story has our Ionic, and our third story has our Corinthian. And so we have this reference to the Greek orders. So they're using this Greek idea, but not for the same function. They aren't weight-bearing. It's purely decorative. At the very top, we have this new word called a pilaster. And so this is where the column is flattened out. It's more this rectangular shape. It's projecting only slightly from the face of the wall. So new word, Greek elements, new use. Got to go there as well a few times. And talking about arches and concrete and different exterior facades, let's discuss the Arch of Titus. So the Arch of Titus is a triumphal arch. As you can see, it's massive. I mean, here's a comparison of people. You used to be able to walk through it, but now that is closed off. The first time that I went in high school, you would enter the Roman Forum, the city center, by walking under the Arch of Titus. Now that area is closed off. At the top, it says, the Senate and people of Rome to Divus Titus, son of Divus Vespasian, Vespasian Augustus. This was created in honor of Titus by his predecessor. So it's called the Arch of Titus, even though it wasn't made by him. It was made after him, but it honors him. Here's the interior. If you're looking up, there's so many details. So this Roman triumphal arch is a Roman. It's indicative, it is symbolic of Rome. We find it across the Roman Empire. Even when I was traveling through Jordan, that had been under the Roman Empire for a significant period of time, and all the Roman areas, you would enter them by going under these triumphal arches. So again, it spans the entire Roman Empire. And so this was a triumphal arch. It's recognizably Roman, and they were made as part of this victory celebration of an emperor returning from a conquest. And they would parade through the city and go through these previous arches in hopes that, or knowing that they would also have their own arch made to celebrate their victory. It's made of concrete and veneered in this marble. So the marble's attached, which the fact that it's not full marble, concrete was relatively cheap by comparison. These triumphal arches are massive, but they're not very expensive to the state, which makes people happier. They're cheaper. And so we're going to look at one of these friezes on the interior. So here's the other side. We're going to look at the opposite with our spoils from the Temple of Jerusalem. So the victory that is celebrated here is the conquering of Jerusalem in 70 AD by Titus. Here's an artistic reconstruction. And so the Romans conquered Jerusalem and they destroyed the temple in 70 AD. And we know that because they're carrying the menorah and other sacred objects from the temple. So look at this sense of space that we have here. The composition is crowded, yet it's not chaotic. We have these individuals in the foreground, in the middle ground, in the background. So we understand the formidable and massive troops of the Romans, and they destroyed this Roman temple. And so across the globe, a conquering nation will take spoils from the nation that they conquered. And so when these troops returned, they were carrying and parading the spoils of war as they walked through the Roman center in this parade, as they did with every form of a victory. And so we know, again, which area they conquered by the motifs that they use. So there's this illusion of depth, this illusion of space, and how this sense of light and shadow really contributes to this sense of space and volume. And essentially, again, it's political propaganda. So consider how we've seen that before. With our victory of Naram Sin, we have the text written of what happened. The text here, we have the conquering of these other people. And so the story of time. And that wraps up our early Roman Empire.